Hi, everybody. Hope you all had a wonderful weekend. Today we are looking at another monologue from Macbeth. As always, the monologue is in the description below, so take a moment to pause, read it, and then come on back. So, couple quick things. 1, yes, different hoodie. I do own multiple. 2, why am I doing another Macbeth monologue? Well, I found out this morning while I was eating breakfast that Shakespeare's Globe in London is releasing their most recent production of Macbeth on YouTube for free at 2 p.m. today. So I'm celebrating by doing the Dagger speech. Now, since I've done Macbeth 3 different times already, you all should have a basic understanding of the plot, so I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to talk about how we prepare Shakespeare for a modern audience. Let's begin. The majority of what we do to prep it for a modern audience is we take stuff out, we cut, we remove pieces of Shakespeare's work, and we're able to do that because Shakespeare is in what is called the public domain, meaning that his work is not owned by anyone. No one has the rights to Shakespeare. It's not like Harry Potter where J.K. Rowling owns the rights to Harry Potter, and you can't create a Harry Potter movie or book without her involved. Somehow. With Shakespeare, you could write a sequel to Hamlet if you wanted to, and it would be okay. So we can cut, we can remove. And each person who cuts and removes things from Shakespeare, whether they're a director or someone who's just trimming it for a production, they have their own criteria for what is important and what isn't. So I'm going to talk about what I look for when I cut, so that if you are ever in a position where you have to, you can, maybe use me as an idea or ignore me entirely. That would be up to you. So, when I look for my cuts, what I look for are 3 things. First, I look for repetition. Shakespeare, because of the nature of his theatrical era, he had to do a lot of verbal description of things. His lighting source was the sun. His sets were pretty much non-existent. He had some costuming. So he had to do a lot verbally. And that means he describes things 2, 3, 4 times sometimes. And as a person cutting it, I'm like, okay, we don't need descriptions 2, 3, or 4, so boom, gone. Don't have to think about it anymore. We then also look for things that are unnecessary to the story you're trying to tell. When I cut Shakespeare, 90% of the time it's because it's for a production and it's one that I'm directing. So I have a certain vision for what I think this story is about. My example for this is when I directed The Merchant of Venice a few years back. I wanted to really focus on Shylock and the merchants, and I wanted to focus on their lives, their interactions, and their issues, which meant there was an entire subplot around Shylock's servants that was completely unnecessary to the version of the story I wanted to tell. So I removed them. And that's like 5 to 10 scenes that just gone, poof, out the window. Now, Shakespeare and I, if I ever meet the man in an afterlife, may look at me and go, that was a stupid decision, and I'll have to have that conversation with him then. But for right now, it's what I feel and what I believe, and that's one of the big things about cutting, is it based on your opinion and your interpretation. The third thing that I look for is things that a modern audience will not understand. In fact, if you look at Shakespeare's comedies, a lot of that stuff, a lot of the reason they're not as funny as we would expect a comedy to be is because they're making jokes that we just don't get. They're making jokes that are relevant to the Elizabethan England setting. They're making jokes that are topical to their day. It's like in 20 years from now, somebody's going to see a Tiger King meme on the internet and go, what the heck is this all about? And some person who was alive during this point saw that particular Netflix series is going to laugh uproariously and go, oh, no, you had to be there to get it. It's the same thing with Shakespeare's comedies. And I know somebody's going to roast me for comparing Shakespearean comedies to Tiger King memes, but I'll take it. When I cut shows, those are the 3 things that I look for. Repetition, things that are unnecessary, and things that audience won't understand. Now, when I cut, however, nothing is finalized until the actors are memorized, pretty much. And even then, if I really decide something needs to go, I'll work with the actors to make it work. And I do 2 major rounds of cuts. The first is in isolation, myself and the paper, and I make my cuts based on those 3 criteria that I talked about. Then I sit down with the actors who are going to be playing these characters. I let them read it out. This is their read-through as a part of the rehearsal process. And when they read, I'm listening, and I've got my pen in my hand. And as I'm listening for things that they're stumbling over or that they seem confused about. Because if an actor doesn't know what they're saying, the audience will never, ever know what they're saying. And so I'll cut things there as well. And then I resend things out, and everything's all wonderful for the actors most of the time. So that's how I cut. And there is one last thing that I need to talk about, and there are 2 sides to this last thing, and I'll go very, very briefly into them. Shakespeare writes in something called iambic pentameter most of the time, where he has a certain number of syllables in each line, and things are set up in a certain way. And there are some people who will insist upon cutting to make sure that the iambic pentameter is preserved. There are others who say, I'm cutting what I need to cut, regardless of whether the pentameter is still there at the end of the day. I fall into that second camp. I do not care about Shakespeare's iambic pentameter. I will let the story be told in whatever way is most necessary and whatever way I feel works best. So, without any more further ado, we'll talk about what cuts I made to this Macbeth monologue. I'm going to post in the description below both versions. I will put the stuff that was cut in brackets if the strike-through doesn't copy over when I copy it into YouTube. Now, with the Dagger speech, there are 2 major cuts that I made, and I made big cuts with this. The first cut comes down, he talks about this dagger that he is envisioning in front of him. And he has the thing that's like, art thou but a dagger of the mind, a false creation, proceeding from the heat-oppressed brain? And then he continues on about this dagger, saying, I see thee yet in form as palpable as this which now I draw, which means he's taking a dagger out of his pocket, or something. And frankly, the 4 lines that I cut here aren't really necessary and can be cut very clearly because A, if you don't have that dagger for whatever reason, you would want to cut this anyway. And B, we already know we're talking about the dagger, so there's no real need for it. Later on, I cut a section from now o'er the 1/2 world to moves like a ghost. It's a big chunk of lines. 2 reasons. 1, this is basically explaining to the audience, hey guys, it's nighttime, and in a modern production, we're going to be able to showcase that in a different way. And then it also makes a couple references to Hecate and Tarquin, which most modern audiences won't really get, even though Hecate actually appears in this play, so that one may be a little bit of a stretch, but if you take out part of it, you really should take out this entire section because it builds into each other. So I took that out due to references, leaving us with a monologue that is less than a page long, which is really good in this case. So let's see it with its cuts. Is this a dagger which I see before me, the handle toward my hand? Come, let me clutch thee. I have thee not, and yet I see thee still. Art thou not, fatal vision, sensible to feeling as to sight? Or art thou but a dagger of the mind, false creation, proceeding from the heat-oppressed brain? Mine eyes are made the fools of the other senses, or else worth all the rest. I see thee still, and on thy blade and dudgeon gouts of blood which was not so before. There's no such thing. It is the bloody business which informs thus to mine eyes. Thou sure and firm-set earth, hear not my steps, which way they walk, for fear thy very stones may prate of my whereabout and take the present horror from the time which now suits with it. Whiles I threat, he lives. Words to the heat of deeds too cold breath gives. I go, and it is done. The bell invites me. Hear it not, Duncan, for it is a knell that summons thee to heaven or to hell. We'll be back tomorrow, everybody. Bye!